Good morning. It's time to calibrate, and this is episode 53, or episode 1 of year 3. I'm Brent, and despite this momentous occasion, we find ourselves 2 men down this morning. Marc, unfortunately, has had a veterinary emergency with his aging tabby, so we cross our fingers for him this afternoon. And Bob, on the other hand, has had a planned rendezvous with a cenote in Mexico. Now, the fun fact here is that it's actually cooler where he is than it is in Ontario this week. However, as promised in the last episode, I am not alone. I am excited to be joined by special guest James Stacey. Welcome, James. How are you this afternoon? Are you keeping cool?
I am. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. Doing my best to keep cool. No big struggle, thanks to AC and fans and that sort of thing. But it's warm here as it is there. And sorry we won't have the other fellas, but I hope they're both doing well.
Yeah, they are. And we'll check in with Marc once this is done. Now, of course, if you spent any time reading about watches over the last decade and a half, chances are you've read something by today's guest, even if you didn't realize it at the time. James Stacey is the editor-in-chief of Hodinkee, co-host of the Grey NATO podcast, a photographer, a writer, a traveler, a car enthusiast, and somehow a guy who always seems to find himself in the right place with the right watch and a camera in hand. Now, long before Hondinkee and TGN, James was writing hands-on reviews for Watch Report and later a blog to watch. Whether he's covering a new driving across a continent or recording another episode of the Grey NATO, his work has always been about the people, the places, and the experiences that surround those watches. Now, I've had the pleasure of running into James more than a few times over the years at the Toronto Timepiece Show, the Vancouver Timepiece Show, and of course, wandering the halls of Watches and Wonders in Geneva. He's always generous with his time, quick with a laugh, or a bit of advice, as we'll today, and exactly the same person he is off camera as he is on it. So James, it's always good to see you. Welcome to Time to Calibrate, and congratulations on everything that's happened over the last couple of years. Thanks for kicking off season 3 with us.
Oh man, it's an absolute treat, and yeah, that's quite the intro. Thank you so much.
Most people say, "Is that my eulogy?" But yeah, we do a bit of a dive here for sure. So obviously, you're familiar with the format. We usually get things rolling with a wrist check, and you are the guest, so you have first dibs. What's on wrist this morning?
Yeah, I'm actually wearing my, it's a Hodinkee LE. It's the Longines Zulu Time in titanium with the sort of yellow accents. I've got it on actually a new strap and a new buckle for me. So it's a 3-way bit of fun here. It's the Watch of Espionage cat strap, which is their like kind of cotton canvasy NATO. It works really well on just about everything I've tried so far. And then I was just at Wind Up Chicago this past weekend, and I ran past the Fitwell booth. They make the buckles with micro just in them. So I fitted a titanium one to this, and it's perfect. You could just kind of squeeze it to pinch it in and out. It's kind of clever, but this is about as comfortable as I found this watch to be off the bracelet. So that's great.
Well, that's fantastic. I think I actually saw that in one of your Instagram posts. It looks fantastic.
Yeah, I think it was the last one I put up on the net for sure. How about you?
I'm wearing the Breitling Aerospace, actually, kind of in honor of you. It was actually
I got mine here.
after episode 178, where you guys did some kind of Breitling challenge. I think you were lamenting the fact that you'd lost that 40 millimeter watch that you're showing me right now. And that I wasn't really looking for one, but like serendipity happened, and a friend of mine reached out over DM and said, "Hey, would you like this watch?" And I was like, "Oh man, that would be perfect." So mine's a little bit newer. It's 2007, and it's a 42 millimeter case, but it is on a Grey NATO today, and it is the actual Grey NATO signed by TGN.
Oh, there you go, House NATO. I like it.
That's right.
Good stuff. Yeah, I remain just a huge nerd about those watches. I think they're one of the most slept on things in the quartz world for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think you were just posting too about an Autodromo recently that is kind of anti-digi, and it looks like, everything's coming up anti-digi in your life at the moment. So
yeah, I'm a sucker for it. I like it. I think it's the last shreds of the late 80s, early 90s kid.
No, James, despite Bob's absence today, I happen to know what he's been wearing a lot while he's been down in Mexico, and it's that DWC, that Deli watch company, Terra.
Yeah, the Terra.
It's a watch. Yeah, it's a watch that I haven't yet had in hand, but recently you did an on paper, on wrist episode, I believe. What are your thoughts in a nutshell? Bob would love to know.
Oh, I'm really impressed by it. One, I think that the watch world will always benefit from inexpensive things that you can get excited about, right? Whether that's a cheap strap. I think if we all think back to maybe after the first big wave of demand for the Moonswatch, and that started to be something you could get for a few $100 and enjoy. I will always be a fan of like, what's the cool thing that you can find on Amazon? Maybe you have to wait a little bit and you can get it for $100 or something. And this is like $40 to $5 US, something like that. I think I paid a little under 100 Canadian, all shipped. And then once DHL took their tax and the rest of it. And it's exciting to see a different part of the world start to enter the like global watch enthusiast space. And Delhi Watch Co. is not new. This is the Tarot was made for their 5th anniversary, so it's having that impact by making something that feels quite unique and special. And this watch inspired by a carabiner, and it's essentially lugless. It has channel lugs, but you don't even have to thread. There's like a portal on each side that you can kind of run the strap through. There's nothing quite like it. It wears weird. It's a very normal, conventional sort of time telling device, but all of the rest of the experience feels quite fresh. And for the money, it's something you can get excited about. And they did 5,500 of the titanium, and then they did a run of a few different versions of the steel, and then I believe they're doing another run of the steel ones shortly.
Yeah, actually, I think I saw that there was a pre-order up there. Now, you mentioned the fact of being excited about something inexpensive like a strap. This thing really is less than a lot of straps that are out there. I ran the rupee price through, and I think it came through at 65 Canadian dollars. That's of course before ordering, but that's pretty crazy. It's fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's an impressive thing, and I think it kind of captured people's imaginations because of the industrial design. And that it came from, that it's coming from India, that it's coming from a small team. They had to borrow the equipment to make the titanium cases. I love that kind of stuff. So yeah, it definitely is the kind of thing that speaks to me. And everyone I show it to, even if they would never be the ones to spend the $50 or $60 or whatever, they're still thrilled that it's kind of exists. It's a bit of like a delight.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you and Jason Heaton, you've often said things along the lines of, this is really a TGN watch, or this isn't really a TGN watch. So if you're a frequent listener of the Grey NATO, you'd understand that almost immediately. But if you had to explain to somebody who's unfamiliar with the podcast, how would you define or describe a TGN watch?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for the most part, it's sport watches. A lot of it would be dive watches or watches that you wouldn't worry about flooding while you were diving. This Longines isn't specifically a dive watch. It's been on 6 dives in Costa Rica, 4 dives in Costa Rica with me. As long as it has the water resistance, you could have it on your wrist next to a computer or something like that. And then the other side of it is like, I think there's a lot of coverage in the world, and certainly Hodinkee's a part of that mix that covers very expensive watches that are a nice thing to know about, but in reality aren't going to matter to most people. We're trying to focus on stuff probably topping out around Tudor. We might occasionally go into a higher end brand. There was a time a decade ago when I bought my Explorer 2 and it cost less than a Tudor costs today. So there's that sort of thing. But yeah, for the most part, it's probably under, call it $5,000. We really enjoy the Seikos, the Citizens, the micro brands, the stuff that you can enjoy, whether you've been into watches for a decade or you might be just starting out and have a healthy budget. I think there's plenty, like I said, plenty of coverage and plenty of people who are more expert than if you're talking about Patek and AP and Lange and Vacheron and that sort of thing.
Of course, prices have been rising steeply in the last little while. In fact, I think that we were talking about the Tudor Pelagos on our last show or the show before that, and we were all sort of surprised to see that was coming in at $8,500. Now, I think that we're talking maybe Canadian price there, but still,
yeah.
You were talking about a Rolex that not too long ago was a lot less than that. It's how do you feel about the pricing?
Yeah, look, I think it's a reflection of a few different factors, some of which is, these brands are dealing with higher costs. Labor is exceptionally high in Switzerland. So if you're buying a Tudor, I've been to where they make Tudors, they don't have the ability to farm that out to a different group of people. Whether they use the same machines or similar machines or whatever, they're making this stuff in Switzerland. And I believe that's never been more expensive than it is now. That may not be true relative to their dollar, but it has to be at least close. I'm not an economist and I don't play one on the internet. But I think that the thing isn't somewhat like when I wrote my Tudor Monarch story, I tried to do a breakdown of like, are these things out of scale in terms of their price? It turns out they're really tied pretty closely to inflation since 2012, since 2013. Obviously there's been price bumps along the way, and there's been years where there was very little movement. So it is a choice. It's not like the cost of a watch is not pinned to the cost of a certain dollar. For example. But yeah, I think the thing is mostly everything feels more expensive. Everything else in your life is more expensive. I think that's easy to agree with. You live in a very expensive part of the world, as I do. And certainly lots of people listening haven't seen their house get cheaper, or their groceries get cheaper, or their car or their gas get cheaper in the last few years. And I think so that eats away at the budget that you might have to spend on something you genuinely don't need, that you buy for an emotional reason. And if you're a real nerd, you also kind of catalog the price of everything. So you remember, oh, Tudor used to be, $2,800 for this or that, or $4,200 for this or that, and now you have kind of a different number when you go to experience it. And I think that's, not to be unfair to Tudor. I don't think it's just Tudor. I think if you were a huge fan of Omega 20 years ago and went to a store now, somebody would have to describe that they went an entire category sort of upwards. Right. So there's been lots of changes in the space, but I think price sensitivity became high during the pandemic. But at the time, there was also more spending because people weren't spending it, say, on vacations. They weren't doing some of these other things for a couple years. And now that life, quote unquote, has gone back to normal, but none of the prices really went down. Everything feels really expensive, for sure. And that's not just watches, but watches are definitely part of it. And if you did Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I mean, watches don't even rank on the list, right? Or we could all rock a DWC Terra and we'd be okay.
Fair enough. Now, you're wearing the Longines Zulu Time this morning. I've seen a few posts and stories on Instagram since the summer began already. I've seen the Autodromo was mentioned. I think you've had an Aries on, and even that new Seiko Rowing Blazers collaboration. Yep. But is there anything that's dominating the wrist this summer?
I mean, it's the aerospace on the Ming. If we're talking about things that are expensive, both the aerospaces are not cheap watches, and the Ming bracelet costs about the same. I'm totally fine with it. I think this bracelet's worth every penny of what you would pay for it. But there's nothing quite like it. And I, one, adore titanium watches, and two, I adore my aerospace, and having a bracelet that feels like it was almost made for it, but doesn't feel anything like the Breitling bracelet is a really fun thing. But that's the one, I mean, it's probably 50% of the time that's what I have on my wrist. Super accurate. I get a couple extra features if I've got to do chicken nuggets for the girls or set an alarm to remember a call later on. I can do all of that right on the watch. This was the smartwatch in 1998, right?
For sure.
And I just love the way they're built. They're super sturdy. I love the way they look. And then you factor in for this insane, additive manufactured, so 3D printed bracelet in titanium that wears like fabric. And it's just it's awfully nice on a kind of sweaty day, or if you're going to go out for a run, you don't have to switch the watch, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it looks like a fantastic piece, actually. And you're lucky in the sense that your Breitling is the 20 millimeter lug width, rather. Mine is actually 22, so I'm kind of crossing my fingers. Maybe we'll see down the road that will be an issue from them as well. But yeah.
I think I might be speaking out of turn, and if I am, folks at Ming, you have my dearest apologies. I believe they're making other sizes.
Perfect.
I think 20 was the one that made the most sense for the watches they kind of thought people would put it on. But there's no way that you would stop there. They've already learned so much, I assume, from that process. It's my understanding that there's other sizes coming.
Excellent. Now, you've already mentioned Chicago. You just got back. I'm sure we'll hear all about it on the next pod, which may be out tomorrow, actually.
Yeah, tomorrow morning.
So how did things go? Any highlights, meetups, watches?
Yeah, great show. Always fun to be in Chicago. It's a really good one for TGN because for whatever reason, maybe we just have a good contingent of Midwesterners. Maybe Chicago is just a place that people like to go in the summer. Maybe a mix of that and more. But obviously the attendance for any of these wind up shows is huge, so it's very easy for us to kind of go in and draft off of their success and run a party or something like that. So we did a great hangout one night with the folks from Citizen. Had maybe 80, 90 people out to a nice brewery and had some chicken wings and, hung out and talked watches for a few hours. I went on the dive with Jason Heaton, the wind up in a lake. So Heaton's done it in the past. This is my first year doing it, but it was super fun. That was on the Saturday. It takes up most of the day, but that's Saturday.
Yeah, that looked like a lot of fun. I think it was, I saw some images of that. It might have been Matt Ludwigson, maybe, that was posting some stuff, but yeah, they looked fantastic. So
yeah, we dove a wreck, and if you listen to TGN, I mean, I can tell the story here too. But I actually lost a watch on that wreck. I was diving with my mid 90s, like 95, 96 Aqualand duplex, and a friend of mine, Ben Lowry, had given me the original factory bracelet for it, which is like true unobtainium as far as Citizen bits and bobs go.
Yeah.
Full titanium with a ratcheting dive extension. So that's what I had, and I just barely got it over my wetsuit glove, and got out in the water, and we were waiting for all the other divers to get in, and I felt the bracelet give, and I looked down in the water. You're floating, so I leaned forward and looked down just to see it go past my fins. And we ended up doing the whole dive. It was a 45-minute dive, something like that, and then I got out of the water, and as other divers are getting out of the water, I'm telling them that I lost the watch, and then the last guy out of the water found it on his last lap of the wreck. It was just sitting on the boat.
Incredible.
So shout out Watch Cows Dive. Jeff pulled it out of his pocket with a big grin on his face. So it had sat in 38 feet of water for 60 minutes is what the depth sensor showed. So nice to have it back. I probably won't dive it on that bracelet again.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Now today there was an interesting release, actually. The Doxa Sub 300, the TI-5 Clive Cussler.
Yep.
I think you've seen it. What are your initial thoughts?
I haven't seen it in person. When I was in Geneva, they had, I think, like components, and they had like a PowerPoint. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's a 300 series Doxa, and it's titanium. It would be difficult to even claim not having some sort of a personal bias. I'm a huge 300 fan versus the 300T. If you want to get down to that level of nerdery, and now we're talking about a titanium sandwich dial, full titanium case. Like, I think this is awesome. There's only, I think it's 300 of them.
Yeah, they bumped it up to 300.
Yeah, which I think is smart. I don't remember the number they told us in Geneva, but it wasn't 300. I don't think.
No, it was like 95 or something like that.
Yeah. So I'm glad that they're going to make more, and it means two things for me. One, I think this is a very cool watch, and if you're a Cussler, like if you're a Cussler nerd and you've gotten the previous two versions, what a cool thing to have as the third. Mm-hmm. Very different, but at the same time, I think together on a table and in a display case, whatever, makes a lot of sense. Two, I don't think that Doxa is the type of brand that would go, and I don't have any insider information or anything like that, but I don't think they would go through the work of putting that case into production and not eventually have it as a standardized model. Maybe it probably won't say Clive Cussler on the dial. Maybe it won't have a titanium dial, all that kind of stuff. But a titanium Shark Hunter would be incredible. Absolutely amazing. I think a titanium Caribbean might work as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. This time around, it's not quite as on the nose as some of the previous Clive Cussler pieces either. Yep. So I think even if you're not a fan, this is the most subtle one for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, yep. Very nice.
Yeah, it says where it would normally say like Shark Hunter or Caribbean or whatever, Sea Rambler, it says Clive Cussler, which I think is kind of rad, and it's subtle enough that I don't have any specific affinity for the Cussler books, but I enjoy the history of it, and I've read 2 or 3 of the novels, which is 5% of the catalog, something like that. But I'm a huge sucker for Doxa. I love the way a 300 looks. I've owned a 200 and adored it, and went back to my 300. I have a Sea Rambler from the 50th anniversary, and just to see it in titanium, especially I think the last titanium one I remember was the 800 Ti, which Jason had one from the Project 31, mm-hmm. which I wore around Vancouver. So I don't know, 13 years ago, something like that. Jason was over for a weekend and he brought it with him, and that was a very cool watch. But to see it in the 300 format, which I think is just one of the sweetest cases in existence, very similar to the exact one that came out in 67, and then to go the extra length with these other elements, I think they made something special, and it wouldn't surprise me if those 300 are burned out at dealers very quickly.
Oh, I would imagine. Yeah, for sure. Now, if you and I were on a dive together today, we've only been playing around in the open water area. Maybe we need not quite maybe 18 meters. So we're going to go a little deeper now. We're going to go maybe a little bit beyond watches, which is what we started with today. Of course, this is a watch podcast, but perhaps many people would assume that you were always destined to end up in watch journalism, but that's not really the case. Before Hondinkee, before the Grey NATO, before any of us knew your name, who were you? What were you? Were you always someone who wanted to write, or did you simply keep following your curiosity until it became a career?
No, I don't think I felt any specific way. I think probably when I was younger, when I was in my teens, even before then, I had a love and appreciation for cameras and for photography. At the time, digital was exceptionally new, so we didn't have a digital camera, and film was still a kind of a cost. So maybe you do some a disposable camera every now and then. Mm-hmm. So it was always more of an academic interest. I liked photos and photo books and magazines and things like that. And I always kind of, I think like a lot of kids my age, I heard the other day that it's like it was one of the most common things people claimed. If you're about 40 now, you thought you were going to be a marine biologist or an oceanographer or something like that. And I've had the chance to do work next to those sorts of people, and I still think that's an exceptionally cool job, and I have a cool job, so I think I'm allowed to say I have some, meat skin in the game as far as how cool jobs can be. But yeah, I went through university and didn't really enjoy school super, not to any high level. But I did learn that I really enjoyed writing. I enjoyed the process of being given like a big task to kind of think through
Mhm.
and synthesize down into words. And I got out of school, and right at that time, I was wearing a Columbia field watch, like a salmon silvery sort of dial Columbia field watch I'd been given, and the battery died. I took it into here in Canada in the Bay at the time and dropped it off. And they said it'd be 15 minutes or something, put another battery in it. So I walked around and saw a case full of Seikos and Citizens. And I thought, what, those look totally different than my little field watch. Went home and started Googling stuff. And at the time, it was Time Zone and Watch You Seek and Poor Man's Watch Forum
Mhm.
and a site called Watch Report. So this predates Hodinkee and a blog to watch, and I think most of the other major players these days. And I read, I think at least to some extent, definitely skimmed, if not read every post on the site over the next month or two. And then they posted that they were looking for people to write in. There wasn't any money in it. There's no free watches in it. There's nothing like that. It was just like if you might be want to be involved. And I wrote them a spec story about my current fascination was the Panerai Radiomere.
Okay.
And at the time, so this would have been like 2008. I think a lot of us were into Radiomeres at the time. I remain a huge fan of the way they look and wear, despite being quite large watches. I wrote a story, they took it, and I think I got $10 a story for the next while. Yeah, I did that for several years, and then it was a blog to watch, and then it was Hodinkee.
Fantastic. One thing I've noticed over the years, sort of following you, certainly through TGM, is that you don't really seem to have casual interests, whether it's cameras, coffees, cars, audio equipment, maybe even backpacks or dive gear. You tend to disappear down that rabbit hole for all of those things until you understand the subject inside and out. Has that always been part of your personality? Were you that kid that needed to know everything before you went on to the next thing?
I think cars got me there as a kid. Just the fact that you could cars, or I remember my dad at like a garage sale bought all these binders that were just like it must have been for people who I guess maybe sold military equipment, but it was like almost like flashcards for every helicopter. How big were they? What weight were they? How many people did they carry? What fuel did they need? Like it was all on these cards. It was one of those binders that had like 12 rings, but it was a weird shape. And we had them for helicopters, we had them for planes. I grew up not that far from the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. So as a kid who, as you can tell, I like to talk like this when I was 4. I just maybe the sentences were slightly less complicated. My dad liked to fill time by giving me something new to look at. So we'd go look at warplanes and that sort of thing. And I think I just always and I think as I gotten older, I go less deep. I kind of find a breaking point where like I know enough to be making the right decision on a product or enough to be able to have a conversation with somebody who taught me the first part of whatever. Um, but yeah, I think I remain just a pretty kind of curious person. I like if something strikes that curiosity, it's very difficult for me to write it off.
Yeah, that's great.
Not every topic, but definitely the stuff that it hits pretty hard.
Well, I've got a bit of a story for you. A couple of years ago, I was heading to Saint-Imier with Longines, and the only other journalist in the car was Claudio Cusano from Nouveau, where you
Oh,
worked
I'm a
a little
big
while,
Claudia fan.
all on cars, actually. And somehow we got onto the topic of James Stacey. And she proceeded to tell me, with no shortage of pride, that she might have been one of those people who convinced you to pursue watch journalism instead of automotive journalism. So did she actually change the course of your career? And is there a small part of you that wonders what it would have looked like had the focus remained automobiles?
Yeah, I think Claudia was always a real supporter. And Claudia, if you happen to hear this, nothing but love. I miss working for you. Maybe we get to work together again someday. I'm always delighted every time we cross paths on a press trip or if I see her somewhere around the world. She gave me a great opportunity with Nouveau magazine. I got to be the editor at large for automotive, and the thing that I think most people in the States, if you're in the automotive space, would understand is maybe less obvious in Canada, is there aren't that many luxury magazines in Canada. So I immediately became kind of a big fish in a small pond. Like my
Mhm.
first press trip was a Munich Autobahn trip with Porsche. For I guess it would have been the 14 or 15 or maybe 16 Panamera Turbo. And so it was a dive right in. And look, I would never say that I'm an expert about cars, but definitely a booked enthusiast. Much more better read than driven, certainly, or owned. But yeah, I worked for Claudia for a long time, and then over time, I think it just became clear that like the watch thing was the one that was moving, that was going to progress more in terms of it being a career.
Mhm.
And when various opportunities came up, including opportunities that would mean I couldn't keep working for Nuvo, she was always super supportive. And I genuinely miss that job. I miss going on automotive press trips. It's a great crew of people, much like you learn the 20 or 30 people that you might pool up with on a press trip. It's not that different in the automotive world. Um, they have the folks in the automotive world have less impulse control, which is always fun. Then it's there's if there's a gas pedal, they'll find it. But yeah, I made a lot of great friends there, including Claudia, and it's a time in my life where if my scenario changes, I would be thrilled to return to that, and probably from a much more wise perspective of like not getting over my skis in terms of putting myself in a position that I maybe haven't earned necessarily.
Now, you cut your teeth in places like Watch Report at a time when online watch journalism was still kind of finding its feet.
Mhm.
And then, of course, you progressed to a blog to watch, and that suddenly opened doors to places like Baselworld, SIHH, international travel, and a lot of new experiences. Looking back now, what were the biggest lessons that you have from those early years? What do you know now, for example, that 25-year-old James would have had no possibility to understand?
Yeah, just how much this world is, the relationships and what you make of it. It really is an investment in results out, but that's never going to be as easy as like a spreadsheet. It's a very small world. There are people that I started working with or working around, whether they're other brands or other PR departments or other websites that are now in charge of brands and PR departments and other websites. I started at a blog to watch, just as a guy who would send in the occasional story. And Ariel, much like Claudia, gave me huge opportunities. Basically, put me in positions where I could just overextend enough to learn, but not get hurt. And Ariel was a great mentor for me. Taught me a lot about the idea that you kind of, if you wanted to do this, if you wanted to do it well, you had to pretty much know how to do all of it. So if you wanted to make a podcast, you should probably know how to edit a podcast
Right.
so that you're not necessarily relying on another person. And if you really want to write about watches, the next step would be knowing how to photograph watches.
Mhm.
And if you're going to learn how to photograph watches, you should also learn how to be a really good photo editor, right?
Yeah.
And it's all that kind of stuff. And if you're going to run a website that's based on WordPress, you should learn the ecosystem that WordPress kind of is. So it's this sort of Ariel has so many skills, but very few of them are like insectoid in their focus.
Mhm.
They all kind of spread into lots of other things. And the watch world is full of lawyers and people with legal backgrounds that do very well in our space, because it's a multidiscipline sort of way of thinking. And Ariel's certainly a good example of that. And then, yeah, as far as things that I learned, man, just just your ego gets hit enough until it's the right kind of shape. And I think when you're younger, you have a confidence that I didn't deserve, certainly.
Mhm.
And lots of people were kind about the way that they offered those sort of the sanding elements. I think when I started, I was a lot of corners, we'll say, and now I might be a little smoother. But yeah, mostly it gave me the ability to just absorb from people who had either figured things out or had this like mentality of I can figure it out. Ariel was always like I can figure it out sort of guy. Ben is an I can figure it out sort of guy. We'll figure it out. If you want something and you think it's something worth doing, there's probably an agreed upon way of doing it, and then like 10 other ways that it could be done.
Mhm.
And one of those ways might actually be the better way, which is, maybe a very short way of explaining a lot of Hodinkee's success well before my time. Um, but yeah, just I would say that I had no patience when I was younger. I couldn't wait for anything. And that's gotten a little bit better as I've gotten older. I wouldn't call myself a patient person, but I can at least put things in order of how they should exist. But it's just, it's experience. It's the ability to have done it 10,000 times, right?
You brought up photography in the beginning of that answer, and I wonder if you might tell me a little bit about Leica. When did you start shooting with that system? What was the camera? What's it now?
Yep. So I was always shooting Canon for a long time.
Uh-huh.
And then I wanted a smaller setup that would also be kind of easy to take on automotive press strips.
Mhm.
And I thought I'd give Sony a try. At the time, I was still keeping the Canon for like a studio camera, like it was a 5D Mark III. And I was shooting a lot of watches just like on a fixed studio. So you could just turn the lights on, put the watch down, and start shooting. But I wanted something you could pocket and take with you. And at the time, the Q was quite popular, the Leica Q. And I thought there must be a way to just make a poor man's Q. So I bought a 6300, a Alpha 6300, the small Sony, and then the Zeiss 24 millimeter that nobody talks about,
Okay.
which also has like a 17 centimeter close focus.
Okay.
So great for wrist shots. Perspective wise, if you go back and see some of the photos, it takes a lovely photo, but you can tell that that the cars were shot too wide.
Mhm.
And that's just, I didn't have the experience to understand that like a car looks a lot better at 85 or 100 than 24. But on a press trip, 24 also means I'm getting more photos than other people. I don't have to be as far back. I can get a photo from where you're capable of and that sort of thing. So I use that for a really long time. And honestly, if it weren't for my own stupidity, I'd probably still be using that or a similar setup. I took it to take photos of my daughter on her birthday, and we were at a bowling alley, and I had it on the table, and the neck strap got snagged, and it like
Oh.
whiplashed onto the floor. It didn't fall at like gravity; it fell at like you swung it into the ground.
Oh.
And camera was fine, lens was not, and the lens was worth more than the camera. So I started hunting around, and a friend of a friend was like, "Hey, I know some people at Leica. Maybe they've got something. You should at least try the Q if you're essentially resetting." And so it worked out that I was able to get like a refurbished Q from Leica. Price was fine. Their stuff is expensive, but once you're in, it's like you get bit by it and you're in. Shot Q for a really long time, and then just wanted the ability to play with some of my old lenses. The vintage stuff and
Right.
the SL system, you can basically adapt anything to it, new, old, almost anything you can put on it, and you can find adapters or just some of them can be 3D printed, stuff like that. So not that long ago, I switched over to the SL for the majority of the sort of like anything where I need autofocus, and then I have an M10 that I'm lucky enough to own as well. So yeah, the Leica thing has been great. I've been to the factory where they make them, or make some of the stuff in Germany. They do a lot elsewhere as well. Look, they're certainly expensive. It's like a premium product, but also like at a certain extent, I've owned a few of the different systems, and this one is the first one where like a lot of it, I just really like the outcome.
Okay.
And it feels like I'm fighting less of the parts I don't like when I'm using it. But you have to decide what works for you. I mean, there's some incredible cameras for not that much money anymore.
That's true.
That's the reality.
Absolutely. I've always thought of your photography as maybe having a recognizable voice. It never feels, for example, like catalog photography. Your watches feel like they live in places. They're on road trips, they're on hiking trails, they're maybe off a hotel balcony or certainly lakeside on the dock. You seem to think maybe photographically before maybe journalistically. And is that something you consciously developed, or is it just how you see the world?
I definitely am a visual thinker, and the goal, especially with the watch photography, would be like what we term internally now is super editorial.
Mhm.
So a catalog is hyperized. That's not necessarily real. It might even be a rendering.
Mhm.
So the goal would be to have a watch photo where you can tell it is the watch in the space that you're showing it in, but there's no dust, there's no fingerprints. The lighting is ideally perfect. Although I do and if there's a style to the way that I do it, I love a single source. So like if
Okay.
you have daylight, that's great. If you have one flash, that's great. If you have two flashes, that's great, but have them come from the same direction. I like light moving across, like horizontally across an image as much as possible.
Mhm.
And again, I think a lot of this is informed by automotive photography,
Okay.
where the sun will always have a shape to the light that's coming across the car.
Mhm.
And that's the medium with which I was obsessed from when I could read. I mean, I still have some of my earliest car magazines, and I can remember some of those photos very well. But yeah, the photography thing I think probably came more easily than, or like probably came to me more easily in terms of development than writing, but also, you know, more reps, right?
Okay.
With a lot of this, you get to shoot essentially as much as you want. You're not paying by the frame anymore.
So were there photographers or styles that shaped your eye, whether it be for cars or watches?
I mean, for watches, it's almost certainly Ariel Adams and David Breton, the
Okay.
two guys that I shot the most with. You know, you're always going to be the average of the five people you spend the most time with. If we go beyond, those guys, then Stephen Pulverin.
Okay.
I learned a ton about just photography in general from him. You know, how to think about the way that you know, I think a lot of us think about a photo in how it's going to be in Instagram, or if you're my age, how it was on Flickr,
Hmm.
or how it might be in a pixie set if you're you know, a working photographer. But if you're writing for editorial, you could think about the way that the text might wrap around your image,
Right.
and kind of, so when you're choosing distances, when you're choosing padding, things like that, a lot of that can come from, again, having done the plan the shoot, do the shoot, write the story, put it all in a CMS, preview it 1,000 times, make sure there's not like weird formatting errors, and then do that enough, and you just, that's the way that you sort of think about things.
Switch gears a little bit here. Let's talk about the Grey NATO. Most watch podcasts are really just about watches, but yours has always been about, of course, travel, adventure, diving, driving gear, and well, you know the rest. So somewhere in the middle of all this, there happens to be a watch. Was that the vision from day one, or did you and Jason gradually discover what the show wanted to become?
So yeah, when we started the show, it's basically was the plan. I think the only thing that we adjusted over time was we added like driving and diving. I think it was diving if you go back to the first, say, 30 episodes or so. We ended up talking more about, like, because it was never like to talk about cars, but if I went driving somewhere, then there was like an adventure tied to it, so that it kind of extended into that. But the plan was always to create like essentially a personality driven um show that was anchored to multiple topics, all of which watches kind of exist within. So it's like a web or a network. I grew up, absolutely, and I remain very much obsessed with podcasts. I'm a big fan, but back in the day, there's a very kind of important one, an important kind of grouping of them from the tech world, which would have been like This Week in Tech and Techzilla and the Dig Nation show with Kevin Rose, who would later work for, and at one point I think was the CEO of Hodinkee just before my time. But a weird coincidence nonetheless. And those shows all had personalities where you kind of wanted to hear what these people, or at least you were interested in the conversation that might come from these personalities. And at the same time, they had topics that they could hit into. But those might go way off the rails. You know, there was a great podcast from One Up, the One Up podcast, which is a video game website from way back in the day.
Okay.
And they would start with a point, and those 2-3 guys had no ability to stay on topic at all. And those are the shows that I always really liked. It felt like you were part of you know, I grew up with talk radio. I grew up with you know, CBC on in the garage on a radio that would never shut off unless there was a power outage. And I like just listening to people talk and hearing other opinions, and I like people's voices. I enjoy all that kind of stuff. So I think for me, I've always enjoyed the idea of a podcast. And then when it became something that you could listen to, I was around before they were part of iTunes,
Okay.
like before it was part of Apple's. You had to go to like a website and download an MP3 file, and you could play that as your podcast, before all the distribution and the rest of it. So yeah, I've enjoyed it for a long time, and it's a medium I feel pretty strongly about. And I think over time, it's one of the few mediums that has aged really well.
Hmm.
Like I think photography on the internet kind of hit a peak with Flickr, and then it became more about the subject of the photo than, say, the photo itself,
True.
the story behind it, or the social media, or the brag, or the
Hmm.
lifestyle, or whatever it may be. Whereas like Flickr used to just be like, look at this picture of the bug I took, and then I could learn all about the lens because it was all encapsulated in it. I could see there'd be a forum below, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was the aspect for the podcast was, yeah, was very much planned kind of to go into that route. I had been thinking a really long time about what I wanted the show to be, and who I wanted to do it with, and then I got connected with Heat, and it all just kind of slid together. So I mean, 10 years that went by pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, you just mentioned personality, and you and Jason have an incredible synergy. And I know that you were introduced by Mike Pearson, and who has
Mhm.
also been a guest on our show. But I'm more interested in about the aftermath. Like you just said, it's been 10 years. He's clearly more than just a colleague. How do you characterize what you and Jason have together?
Yeah, I think it's like the weirdest pen pal relationship ever because we've never written a letter to each other necessarily, but like we see each other maybe twice a year.
Hmm.
I saw him in Chicago this past weekend, so I've got to ride that high for a while. He's one of my favorite people. I like the way his brain works. I like that. You know, I always try and live by strong opinions loosely held. So I'll have a take and I'll scream it into a microphone or whatever. But if you have a piece of data, I'll turn around immediately. Like whatever's actually the right way to think is probably the right way to think. And Heaton has that open mindedness to the way his life has moved, the way life moves around you, to changing his mind about watches and other experiences and that sort of stuff. And there's just enough of like an age gap between us that we have different touch points for culture,
Okay.
which I think expands. So we're not often making the same references or thinking in the same metaphors, which I think is helpful. But we do kind of have the same sort of scope on like what we feel in life is important, the things that aren't important. Um, and neither of us are really the types where we're trying to be necessarily like a different person on the internet than we are at home
Mhm.
or than we are, when the microphone is off. It's not to say that it's not a performance. It's a microphone. I'm performing to some extent. I'm attempting not to swear, for example, right now, because my mom might listen to this or something like that. But I think you guys know what I mean. Where like you try and just put something. And look, the audience isn't like massive. I'm not. It's not like a Joe Rogan thing where I really have to worry about what people think. But um, you try and just put out something that you hope some people will connect with, and you can kind of build a community around it where you get to skip the first 10 steps of a friendship when
Mhm.
you meet somebody. I met 85, 90 people at a couple events in Chicago this past weekend, and it's like everybody. It's great.
That's a great way to put it, actually. Um, this next story is embarrassing to both Mark and me. So I'm gonna share it with some trepidation. But at a marathon
Okay.
event, you gave us what has turned out to be some of the best podcasting advice that we have ever experienced. And it was
Oh, okay.
edit each track separately. And
Oh, yeah, yeah.
except that you didn't even give us it as advice. You were just chatting about podcasting. It was something you just mentioned casually in passing. And Mark and I looked at each other in that moment. And I know that the thought was like synaptic between us. We're like, you can do that. And it perfectly captured where we were at that time. And it makes me wonder a little
Sure.
bit, what was your own learning curve like with podcasting? What were those early episodes of the Grey NATO like? Were they as polished in your mind as they sound now? Or were you figuring it out
No.
one at a time?
Yeah, we're figuring it out. I do believe, especially when you're starting something, like if you're I'm very junior in my woodworking phase. So
Okay.
I want to learn how to do things the most laborious way where it's perfect. No corners cut, no skill set that someone who's done it for 15 years gets to use. And if I was teaching someone to drive now, I would want them to learn manual. I'd want them to learn, without the computers that can keep you in your lane and all that kind of stuff. You can use those later on, but you need the basis of the skill set. You need the fingertip sensitivity to whatever the tech is in hand. And I think for me, I just figured like if we're gonna do this, I am typically kind of maniacal about there is a right way to do most things, and that right way can evolve, but it probably doesn't change that much, all things concerned. And like people who are really good at something, it's probably part of that is because they do it the right way. And so I think with recording the show, I didn't want perfection to get in the way of momentum, so we just started making it and we learned from there. But definitely once I had enough shows under my belt that people were listening to it and enough people were listening to it that people would come back to me that I didn't know and say like, "Hey, I work in audio and you should do this." And you go, "Oh, okay, what's that called?" And then they tell you and you go read it up and you go, "Oh, we should be doing that." Yeah, didn't even think of that. That's why it doesn't sound good on this type of headphone or something like that. So it's always advice is a great way to go, but I do feel like you guys, you were making a podcast and happened to glean some advice from me. You have to be in the flow. The advice doesn't come to people who are on the sidelines, right? Like there's not a lot of coaches and players talking about how to do the game to the guy eating some popcorn on the sideline. You have to put yourself in the right place to kind of absorb some of that.
Mhm.
And then the rest of it, man, like I'm sure if I went back and listened to an episode from even 2 years ago, I would be upset with it. In terms of quality, you know, like the audio quality, I think for most people, and this is what I say to Jason, like you kind of have to hit about 80% of perfect,
Mhm.
and then it's good enough for most speakers. Most people are listening to AirPods, which are like fine. They used to be not so fine. They're quite fine now. The headphones and that sort of thing. But we definitely also have people who have written me who are like, "Hey, the show sounds great on my name audio system in my Bentley." Or I inherited my dad's like full Macintosh setup and got to listen to the show last night, and it still sounded pretty good. Your bass is a little high on your voice. I go, all right, I'll turn it down a little bit. You tell me next week, and you can do stuff like that. But yeah, it is a perfectionist game, which is kind of fun. And there's of course, like you get to learn about gear, you get to read about gear, you get to learn about what kind of bit rate is the best. You know, can you get 32 bit? Is it 24? Is it? And I love all that kind of stuff.
They're all rabbit hole hobbies for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And making something like this, just like making something like if you wanted to make a YouTube channel, you have to become a nerd about so many things, not
Mhm.
just the thing that you talk about on the show, which is an exciting thing for me, but I think is also a big bottleneck for people who are, let's say they know a ton about watches, but they don't know a ton about cameras, or they don't know a ton about video editing or how YouTube works, or color grading, or preamps, or underslung microphones, or do we want lavs, or and you go like you either love that or you don't. And I instantly get along with people who are like, oh, that whole zoo is my zoo for sure.
So when you were named to editor-in-chief of Hodinkee, a lot of people, I think, seemed genuinely excited by that decision. And I don't think it was simply because of the appointment itself, but because I think they trusted you. You talked again about personality a little bit earlier, and there's a certain authenticity that comes with both you and Jason. And I think there was a sense that an enthusiast was taking the wheel. And did you feel any weight of expectation when that happened, or
Well, I mean, every single day that I get up, for sure. Yeah, no, it's like the commenting audience is ruthless.
yeah.
And they carry a sharp knife and a pointed, the spears and the rest of it. If you get something wrong, you'll find out immediately, and their response, will be commensurate to the weight of your mistake. So it is a challenging place to learn, but also a place that will teach you something for sure. Um, I think, I think people knew my name from the site rather than having a masthead where occasionally you'd go on and go like, who's this person? You click on them, you couldn't find an article they'd ever written necessarily, or maybe you didn't feel aligned with their, like my taste is very middle of the road guy who's into sport watches. So that there's that kind of demands or allows me an audience almost immediately, as long as I keep working at it and you don't let those people down. But yeah, I think, Hodinkee had gone through a lot of changes and had tried to evolve the business in many directions. My presence on the editorial, team started as a freelance contributor in 2017.
Mhm.
And then I just kind of stuck with it, and the business kind of changed many times around us. And I think where we are now feels the most similar to where it was when I started.
Okay.
Obviously, when we started, we were essentially just a startup. We're now owned by Watches of Switzerland, which affords us a lot of space to play around and try other things and that sort of thing. We are not held to, you have to have this many hits or this many impressions or that sort of thing. It's not that sort of a business. So we do have the room to let a guy like Mark Koslerich write. So I can't even tell you what the story is because it hasn't come out yet, but it's so many thousands of words on a great topic that nobody else would write the story. Or I'm happy to, go to the Toronto Timepiece show and shoot a photo report that most sites wouldn't do that one because it's a lot of work and it's a lot of money. But then maybe we also have Tim Vo do one, or Tim Vox. I get that wrong every time. Tim Vox do one from British Watchmakers Day or that sort of thing. So we really do get to play. It's the watch world is still very news derived.
Mhm.
So you're always going to have some level of the introduction. I think those are good to have. I would love to see them turn more into like baseball cards for all of us rather than whole stories and that sort of thing. I'd love to see. I like it when we get to dig into the nerdy stuff that really makes us love or re-love watches. And that's kind of the goal. But yeah, it's been Uh, yeah, it's a pleasure is definitely the right word, but definitely not one without its weight. Anytime we have a big story, anytime a talking watches is coming up, I'm losing sleep. Um, I want it to go well for the person who put themselves on the internet, and I want our audience to understand, and I want them to find their right audience and all that kind of thing. And it's yeah, it's and the other thing is like with TGN, it's a little bit of like preaching to the crowd or
The
to the
choir.
choir,
Yeah,
sorry. And it's not like that at Hodinkee. It's a huge audience, so I might be able to write a story to a doxa review to the audience. The views are good and that sort of thing. But the minute that article doesn't find its quote unquote niche or an overlap of a niche, it can be very difficult for sure.
do you think that the version of Hondinkee as you have it now is where you want it to be, or is there someplace you want to push it?
Oh no, definitely never happy with how things are. I think the stories going on the site were pretty much where I like to be. I'd like to be able to cover a little bit beyond where we are now, some of the more interesting brands that are more on the periphery. Um, but small team, we're currently hiring, so we should be able to work towards that. But right now, you do want to try and hit things that the audience will want to read and have some reflection on, stories that will perform and that sort of thing. But otherwise, I mean, look, you guys know we are talked about it a bunch already. Like at podcasts, I think I'd love to see a proper return of like a Hodinkee talk watches podcast.
Right.
Problem is, I'm in Toronto. Some of the teams in New York, some of the great contributors we work with are everywhere else in the world. And with something like Hodinkee, people expect that it would be video and that it would look good and that you'd be in the same room and that sort of thing. So there's some logistic, sort of challenges there, but it's something I feel really strongly about, kind of being the third heat. We're never going to be a YouTube led product
Mhm.
in our current form. So we have talking watches. You know, YouTube says it's the most popular watch based thing in English in video, and we're pushing up near 100 episodes, which I think is something to be proud of.
For sure.
There's at least a few guests for everyone in there. And then the other thing that I like is there are so many other sites that have taken that relatively simple format and found their own way to express their personality through it, much like podcasting or that sort of thing. Um, the timing was just great on that first one so many years ago. But yeah, I'd like to see more. I'd like a one or two more sort of video series you could kind of expect and wait for. We're doing a talking watches per month now, which I'm really happy with. We took a break from it for some time, and I'd like to add to that, and I'd love to add a podcast to the roster. Business of Watches is performing very well. People
Mhm.
really enjoy it. Andy has a unique perspective and personality that he can provide through the show, and I'm just so incredibly proud of the way that he's managed that show, and he handles all of it. We work with an absolutely incredible editor. But Andy drives around Switzerland with a microphone and a couple of questions on his mind and gets those interviews. And I'd love to see another person from our team kind of excel into their own sort of platform as well.
So, James, you've seen Baselworld, you've been to SIHH, you've been, of course, to
Yep.
Watches and Wonders. They're all trying to accomplish roughly the same thing, but they do feel very different. And has the industry gained something from that evolution? Maybe lost something? And is there anything that you genuinely miss about the old days?
I really did enjoy being in Basel in the spring. It was a nice place to be. There was always it was a little bit more trade show than luxury event, and like the folks that put on Watches and Wonders, I've talked to Matthew Umer, the CEO, a few times. It's an incredible thing.
Mhm.
He told me at one point how many bottles of water they bring in, like just some of these little stats. Like I want to know, like how many, what's the poundage of like knives and forks that you bring in for this, how all these sorts of things. They do an incredible event, and I think I don't. I was too early in my career. I was going to Basel World and SIHH with a blog to watch. It was probably too early in my career to have the perspective to understand if like the two show format, the like two grand shows in January and then March, April is better or worse. I don't really like that we don't get to have most of the swatch group experience.
Right.
Like I don't get to do the same thing that I might do with like a meeting I might have with Tag Heuer or IWC I can't have with Longines.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bummer. And I would love it if the politics of the scenario could get to the point where Swatch was at a show or at the show, or did their own thing 3 days before or 3 days after for all of us who are already out there. They did. I think they did. What was it called? Just around the pandemic, Swatch Days, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's
Where
possible.
they did sort of their own show. I'm glad that we'll see, Breitling and Gallet and UG join this year coming forward, because like even just this in 2026, it was a pain to go plan a day when you could go see Breitling's thing, and then their watch wasn't coming out for 6 weeks later, and you go like, okay, let's hope I can remember all that. 2 days later, you got no brain cells left, and you haven't slept at all, and you're jet lagged, and yeah, so it's I think a lot of what was cool about Baselworld is reflected in Watches and Wonders now. And then you have Geneva Watch Days, which is sort of that casual summer vibe option. And then the other major evolution, and which is kind of where we started chatting, is these more novel regional shows that are very enthusiast driven. So a little bit less of the B2B stuff, which at Basel was hugely a B2B product.
Mm-hmm.
There was like 4,000. If you wanted to go figure out who made or who could get you the best deal on a spring bar, if you were going to buy 20,000 of them or more, that was a good. You could go to Hall 7.2 and find the spring bar area.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember walking past some of those, like Zinn's booth was way out at Baselworld. Whereas everybody else, the major watch brands were in Hall 1, and you just walk right in and they were all there. But now you have Wind Up, you have the 3 Canadian shows, the timepiece shows here in Canada, you have Intersect, you have Time to Watches, you have a real kind of expansion of these shows that are more focused on small brands and enthusiast audiences. And I think those shows will have a struggle in the next few years as we decide who has enough of an audience that they always have enough people and enough brands. And if brands are coming to Canada, do they come to more than one show? But if they're going to wind-ups, there's 4 or 5 wind-ups now. How do you balance that out? So I think that's like something that's kind of like novel that we'll all experience over the next few years as that marketplace kind of actually falls into place with the market around it.
Mm-hmm.
How many people would want to go to any of these? And if European shows start to pop up, will core European brands maybe not come to North America to run their show?
Right.
You never know. British Watchmakers Day, another good example.
You're mentioning all these shows, and of course, all of these things involve an awful lot of travel, especially for you. Things look a little bit different maybe for you these days. You're now balancing that career with being a father of 3 young children, one very young at the moment. Of course, A lot of our guests have been parents, but I feel like you're very public about that experience. There's no James Stacey watch guy without perhaps James Stacey dad guy. And has becoming a dad changed maybe the way you approach your work, or perhaps even the stories you're interested in telling?
I'm sure that for the latter question, I'm sure that the answer is yes, but it would be difficult for me to know how it's changed. I'm sure that having my kids, and as my daughters get older, and I now have a 1-year-old son,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that has changed the way I do everything. But it's been so gradual a change. Maybe I can't tell that the water's boiling around me, But as far as the sort of, yeah, like I said, I try and just be one person on the internet. I don't include, there's very little of my personal life on the internet. And when I had kids, especially with daughters, I decided like they'll get to choose someday how they hit the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't publish their photos and that sort of thing. And they'll get a little older, and I think they'll appreciate that stance. People my age, our age, we were able to kind of negotiate with a much less intense internet as far as how we wanted to be involved. And by the time my daughters will have the ability to do that, the system around scraping that information and using it for all sorts of reasons, opaque and otherwise, will be much more processed than MSN Messenger and Tumblr and stuff like that, right? Board systems and things like this. So yeah, I definitely, the world has changed there as far as the stories I cover. Yeah, I think you have that perspective of like, I might not be in a position where, or I'm in a position where anything that I want, and a watch is something that we want. We don't need it, right? So you were always talking about that sort of thing, and anything that I might want has to balance against all the things that are wanted of me by the people I love. And so I think that that would definitely change in terms of um, that sort of thing. My time management and my ability, my required tether to a variety software platforms to keep me on topic and working the way I need to work so that I have time in the evening. As you guys can imagine, Hodinkee is as many hours as you want to put into it. There's no start or end date. There's no start time. There's no end time. It could easily be 7 days a week. And there's lots of times where we travel through weekends and that sort of thing. So when you're home, I like to try and use a couple of tools to make sure that I get enough work done that I can step away and be around for dinner time and bedtime, and then if I have to, I can go back and edit a TGN in the evening. That's still fun. So some of the like calendar work isn't or budgets, that sort of thing. Maybe not my natural skill set.
This is something I've always wondered. Hodinkee, of course, it's one of the most influential platforms in watch media, but the Grey NATO feels maybe a little bit more like your workshop. It's entirely your voice, or at least yours and Jason's. It's your pace, it's your interests. Do these two outlets satisfy different parts of who you are creatively, or is this where James Stacey is most completely himself?
Yeah, I mean, TGN would be the space where I'm the least filtered or the least concerned with the outcome of what I might say or that sort of thing, just because it can only affect Jason and I. Like the decisions I make now affect a staff of people who have the talent and ability to exist long term in this industry. And I think that, there's a burden to make sure that you're operating with a perspective that includes their existence.
Mm-hmm.
With TGN, that doesn't have to be the case. I can make decisions based on whatever's good for Jason and I, which I really do like and appreciate, and it allows for a certain type of creativity and sort of fluid decision making. It also means we don't have to be that precious about things that aren't important to us.
Right.
With Hodinkee, it's a little bit of a different scene where it is something that our audience takes very seriously, and thus I believe I have a burden to take seriously whenever it makes sense. And also, we work with third parties. Like this isn't just Hodinkee and a watch brand. It's not just like I could piss off a watch brand. That happens Monday through Friday. And if I'm lucky, they all take the weekend off. Like we can't make everybody happy for sure, but we work with third parties. We work with incredible photographers. We work incredible illustrators. We work with an incredible printer in BC, just in Vancouver there.
Mm-hmm.
And any of those are all relationships that are quite meaningful and don't have anything to do with whether you like or don't like a certain brand's watch, right? And so where I might have come to this as like a raw enthusiast with a lot of hard ideas that I might be, willing to change my mind on, some of the stuff you have to treat it like an actual relationship that does matter. Because bad decisions could mean that people that I work with now that are exceptionally talented in multiple industries could have trouble continuing to work or that sort of thing. And you wouldn't want anything like that.
No, right. Well, you have spent nearly 20 years documenting watches, but also the culture that comes around watches. When you think about the next decade, not just for you, but for watch journalism broadly, what do you hope does not change?
I hope that we always have the full scope, just like with what we were talking about with the shows. You have great big shows that are for trade and maybe for invited press and have some public days. But then you have shows like the Vancouver show, which could be whatever size makes sense for that room, right? And or the early days of Wind Up was much smaller. They're growing, but there'll be small shows. And then below that you have collector meetups. You have a party you might do with Citizen, or the one we do with Marathon where I see you guys. I just hope we don't lose that ecosystem. Is that there's big predators and there's smaller game, and there's it's big fish and small fish. I think the pond should stay as big as possible, but at the same time I would hate it if any one of these got into a scenario where it cannibalized the other or removed the resources that required to support the other. I don't think that watch enthusiasm is one thing. I don't think that watch collecting is one thing. And I think that over time, the diversification of those platforms will allow the people who are only into Waltham pocket watches or whatever to find their home. And maybe they get a story on a major site every couple of years, and that's like a great big moment and that sort of thing. Whereas, the whole industry is not one or two or three top brands or five top brands or the 10 top brands or whatever. There's so much more going on. And what I would want to continue is the fact that a big site like a Hondinkee, like in a blog to watch, like Time and Tide, like Monochrome, like Fratello, any of these incredible sites with, all these people who I respect so much have the latitude to write about a brand that makes, 200 watches a year for 200 people who really like it.
Absolutely.
Right. I like the grassroots side of it, and I always will. And I think that's where podcasting, it doesn't cost that much. All podcasts are kind of grassroots unless you're doing it for the New York Times or Serial or something like that, to make a reference that some of your audience won't even remember. With a previous, peak of podcasting. But yeah, I think I think as long as this remains a space where the middle is enthusiasts and everyone else has to bow down to enthusiasts, whether it's the brands, whether it's the people who want to use the brands to make money, or the brands want to use the people to make the money, enthusiasts can also always sniff out what isn't real. That's what makes them enthusiasts. It's the ability to go, nope, I'm not buying that at all, both with money or with my time. And I think as long as we remain a space where that's the middle, and this remains an enthusiast-driven world, I'm in. I mean, there's still elements of the car world that are like that, but I think you can see that like a lot of the car world is just very corporate, and they're having a lot of trouble connecting with people, and it's because there's some brands have a GUI enthusiast center, and some don't. And I hope watches always has that sort of GUI enthusiast center.
I like that. That's a great analogy. Okay, I'm conscious of obviously of your time, but I do have one last question. You've interviewed scores of people over the years. They've been collectors, CEOs, they've been designers, some watchmakers, and of course explorers.
Mm-hmm.
You become very good at asking questions. So let me turn the table a little bit. What's the question you've always wished someone would ask you, but never has?
Oh, nothing leaps to mind. I mean, I like your question from earlier about like what would today James tell a 25-year-old James. That's I like that framing. But yeah, nothing else really leaps to mind. I'm not the type, like I don't typically write down my interview questions or that sort of thing. I just kind of let it be a conversation as much as possible. But yeah, I'm not sure that I've got any sort of a substantive answer for that. I don't know that there's a question I've always wanted to be asked.
So there was a point in the Grey NATO history where Hodinkee was relatively heavily involved. How did that relationship evolve? How did the control, I guess, revert completely to you and Jason?
Yeah, for sure. So back in the day when we were looking to possibly build out more of like a podcast network for Hodinkee, something that I alluded to still being interested in doing. I also wanted to find some way of paying Jason for his time. We had done, a very long several years of I think at the time we were still doing 2 a month episodes, and I don't think he had a ton to show for it. And it's not like Jason has this innate love of the medium of podcasting, you know what I mean, like I do. It wasn't scratching the same itch to do the show. He enjoyed it, and it had seemed to have an effect with a certain group of people online and that sort of thing, which is great. But I wanted to find some way to pay for it. And so we went to Hodinkee and just said, hey, do you want to do like a licensing deal? We could call it a Hodinkee podcast. We can run the show notes on the site, and you guys use your ad team, sell some ads, and we'll split the money. And so we did that for a while. And to be honest, just like over the course of it, it was too much work to manage and admin and keep track of the ads and keep track of the invoicing and all that sort of thing. And it just ended up not really being worth the effort for us. And so it was very easy to just say like, all right, well, licensing deal over. And we just went back to just doing TGN ourselves. There was never a point. I mean, we'd done so many shows, like we weren't in a scenario where they wanted to listen to an episode before it aired. We weren't going to get anybody in any trouble. We're talking about friggin' boots or something like. So stakes are pretty low on most of our episodes. But yeah, so it was something we tried that didn't work. It taught me to have this very kind of core disdain for, and if we had to get ads to keep TGN alive, we would do that for sure. If people wanted, somebody might want to pay for it. Who knows? If that's the case, we'd probably do it, but that would be a very last ditch I just don't really like ads. I don't like administrating ads or writing them or dealing with brands and the ad reads and the rest of this. And that kind of gave us that push to go, well, maybe your audience would just pay for it. Mm-hmm. And over that span of time, over the isolation tapes that we did during the start of the pandemic here in North America, we started doing weekly episodes because we had so much time on our hands. And so that kind of got us quite a bit of a speed bump in terms of interest. Like our audience got quite a bit bigger once you go to doing weekly episodes. And iTunes gives you there's more interest on iTunes, there's more interest on Spotify. And we had the Hodinkee bump from having the show up in search results and weekly episodes for them. So when we did the leap to Substack as a a listener supported the TGN crew, that was kind of the culmination of everything we had learned from working with Hodinkee. But they were always open to it, and when we said it didn't work anymore, they said, "All right, cool, we get it." So that was easy enough. That at the time that I was working for and with a fellow named Enri Acosta, and just a fabulous guy who I learned a ton from.
That's great. I have to say, before we go here today, that for me, my watch enthusiasm came much later in life. And in fact, it was around 2017, so not that long after you had started TGM. And I remember mowing the lawn and listening to this podcast and listening to the next week. And of course, I think at that point, it was like every 2 weeks or something like that. But
Yeah,
there came a
yeah.
point, like I grew up in Eastern Ontario, very small town, 5,000 people. I had no idea what was out there. And what I loved about TGM was the low cost of entry. You didn't have to have a special handshake or anything like that. It was welcoming. It was very enthusiast driven. It was very authentic. And it's still my favorite podcast out there now. So thanks for that.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's the goal. I don't. My least favorite thing about the current world of the internet we live in is this "I know you, if you know" thing.
Absolutely.
Drives me nuts. Like, just say what it is. If it's so cool, why wouldn't you tell me? It makes me angry because I probably don't know. I'm not that cool. I know about travel, adventure, diving, driving gear, watches, that sort of thing. But like, I just go like, if you have to signal that you know something that other people don't, why would you also need to put that on the internet? It just drives me nuts. It's like the antithesis of the way that I would attempt to approach the internet. But yeah, ideally it would be an open door after doing almost 400 episodes in a decade. I'm way too close to the one tree in the forest to tell you if it is that open of a door. You might log into some episodes. Why are these guys talking about the weather for the first 5 minutes? Right? Or like, who are these? When do they talk about watches? And that's okay. It's not going to be for everybody.
Well, I can't tell you how much I was actually looking forward to this afternoon. So thanks for taking
Dude, I had a blast.
time out of your day. You got a lot of irons in the fire. So thanks so much.
Oh, an absolute treat. Thanks so much for having me on.
I'd also like to thank our listeners for tuning in.
The Time to Calibrate podcast is a bi-weekly show and is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a question or a comment? Email us at timetocalibrate@gmail.com, or you can find us on Instagram at timetocalibrate. If you haven't given us a follow or a review yet, please do so. This helps platforms recommend us to like-minded listeners. You can also follow us individually on Instagram. I'm at Mark Time to Watch. Bob is at Time to Go 1978, and Brent is at Caliber 321. Also, be sure to check out Bob's Time to Go Travel and Timepieces YouTube channel, and be sure to visit thecalibratorist.com for all your watch-related news, editorials, and reviews. Lastly, if you like our show, do tell a friend. Heck, tell lots of friends. We'd greatly appreciate it. That's it for now. T2C out.